Exploration is often considered one of the most difficult parts of Dungeons & Dragons games, not for the players, but for the DMs. So I polled my players to see what their favorite parts about exploration has been, and used that information and some other things that I do behind the scenes to create this list of 3.75 ways to improve your exploration in Dungeons & Dragons. For the sake of this video, exploration is defined as both overland travel and location adventures. That is to say, you going from point A to point B, as well as you being at point B and doing the adventuring in that location, particularly dungeons or towns. The first thing that my players noted was that the memorable locations typically had a gimmick to them, be this thematic or mechanical. Thematically, a good example of this would be when they passed the Scalds, a giant structure of crystal, creating something of a mesa with dragons trapped inside. And above it, for the entire night, an aurora borealis played, but this aurora was in the appearance of dragons fighting. And the dragons fighting were those represented within the crystal. The Scalds created a surreal experience as the players walked across this vast snowy wasteland in the early winter of the northern reaches of the world. It gave them something of a history and a lore of the world without expressly telling them what it was, but it gave them the flavor, and it became a memorable location because of it. Other ways that you can do this is through mechanics. Mechanics make the theme or the gimmick tangible. One of those locations was the Tower of Loon. The entire tower culminated in a fight against a mechanical dragon built into the structure of the tower itself. This resulted in a boss fight where every time they successfully hit the dragon, they had to pull a Jenga block off of a tower, because just like they were damaging the structural integrity of that Jenga tower, they were damaging the structural integrity of the tower they stood in. And everyone waited with bated breaths as they pulled it and replaced it into the Jenga tower to successfully defeat the boss. Another instance of a mechanical gimmick that makes a location memorable is the location my players are in right now. They are in a labyrinth, a Minotaur's labyrinth to be exact. The overarching meta mechanic of the entire dungeon is that every section rearranges every time players sleep, and therefore they are incentivized to make it through the entire dungeon to their location on the other side in one go without taking any rests, lest they lose their progress and their way. Another way to make memorable gimmicks is by combining both themes and mechanics, which you really should be doing anyway throughout any sort of game running or designing. But a good example of this from our games has been the Tomb of Xerus, the Master of Curses, where each room had a different curse applied to players. For instance, a room that gave disadvantage on any sort of dexterity-based check or save, and a treasure chest placed in this room was atop several pillars that you had to jump between to get to. A central room that every time players entered it, they had to roll a wisdom save or lose their memories. If they failed poorly enough, they would lose all memories of self and be reduced to a childlike, infantile state. But only while in this room. Failing these saves created no short supply of hostility between characters, one of which had a traumatic past involving being burned at the stake. He lashed out at the party's cleric after losing his memories and reverting to immediately following that incident. The dungeon itself, this Tomb of Xerus, was memorable because the mechanic was memorable. As they explored, they were discovering new depths to this mechanic, as well as the things that the dungeon had in store for them. Number 2, double random tables. A normal random table would be roll a d4. On a 1, bandits attack. On a 2, monks need help. On a 3, a cult is evangelizing people. And on a 4, a dragon flies overhead. Now, rolling a double random table could result in bandits flying overhead, a cult needing help, a dragon evangelizing, or monks attacking from a local monastery. Strange and interesting opportunities for emergent storytelling are the result of double random tables. And at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you about how to get access to a free resource that has not double, but triple random tables. Finally, 3 through 3.75 is Don't Waste Time. Now, I mentioned the Seeds of the Curse campaign. Well, on the journey to the Tower of Loon, I made the mistake of wasting a lot of time. We went through every single day and rolling multiple encounters for each day, and it was a bit of a slog. The whole session was travel, and the travel was not particularly interesting. Even though emergent stories did happen, it just felt like we were killing a lot of time. Whereas if I had used the principle of don't waste time, I might have followed some of these following guidelines to make it a little more interesting. First of all, for 3.25, give it a time limit, something that is putting a fire under them. For instance, my youth group had a campaign where, after rescuing a group of gnomes from goblins, their town was going to be attacked by the goblins in an act of vengeance. The players, depleted of resources, instead of chasing after the goblins, took a long rest, and when they arrived at the town, it was under siege by the goblins, and they had to fight the goblins off to rescue the town. Having a reason to not linger results in a faster-paced, more dynamic campaign, and in this case, interesting consequences, and therefore meaning to what would have just been overland travel. And tying into this, for 3.5, add stakes and danger. In the New Fables campaign, they had to go from the town of Dollar to a monastery, but it was at the beginning of winter in the far north. They had to deal with the winter encroaching around them, fighting for survival against the elements. They had to dig trenches in the snow to get down to the ground and out of the wind. They had to scavenge for usable firewood, start a fire against the blinding snow, fight off frostbite in their clothing using magic or normal means to do so. And what's more, the dungeon they were heading to had emanations coming out from it. Dark, shadowy creatures with malicious intent, watching them, following them, attacking them, and keeping them from resting at night, circling their camp just beyond the firelight, causing them to have to stay awake to keep the fire alive, to keep the wolves from closing in. And when dawn broke, the wolves vanished. Adding stakes, be it from the dungeon they're going to, the environment itself, be it through extreme weather conditions or extreme landscape conditions or both. Think The Hobbit, where the dwarves and Bilbo have to go through the mountains while giants are throwing rocks overhead and goblins are waiting within the walls of the caves. These sort of stakes and dangers add meaningful consequences and therefore interest and intrigue to the act of adventuring, and therefore makes exploration more fun. Finally, if the real interesting thing is the location they're going to, well, just montage it. Tell them how they get from point A to point B, the things that happen within, and maybe stop them at locations along the way and let them interact with things, make significant choices, but skip over a bulk of the travel time. My players in the New Fables campaign went through the Dragon Roost Mountains atop a friendly dragon's back. This series of events happened in maybe 30 minutes and accounted for some memorable moments, but ultimately it was just getting that out of the way so that they can get to the part that they were interested in. So to improve exploration, employ memorable gimmicks, use double random tables, and avoid wasting time by adding time pressure, meaningful stakes, and montaging. Well, I have been DM Sleeper, that's actually been my name, and this has been Campaign Craft, and I hope it helps you craft your campaign. For access to the triple random tables, check the description below for a link to DriveThruRPG where you can pay what you want for the resource.